Everybody's been talking about the 2015 Ford Mustang. Now, of course, the GT is always going to have its followers, but there's been a lot of talk about this new 2.3-liter EcoBoost. Now, would you believe this little four-cylinder puts out over 300 horsepower right from the factory? And there's been plenty of guys that have been steadily improving upon those numbers. Well, to help those guys out, AIRAID has developed a complete race series cold air intake system. It's designed to optimize airflow to the engine while supporting other engine modifications. Let's check it out. Now, unlike AIRAID's MXP series cold air intake, which has an enclosed air box, our race version has these cold air dam panels. Now, these panels replace the factory intake box, and this weather stripping seals against the hood. We're using a hood like a lid for the air box, while adding plenty of forward-facing surface area to draw in plenty of cool outside air. Now, we have a new intake tube, and it has provisions for all the fittings and everything that you're going to need, along with a much larger turbo inlet opening. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And last but certainly not least, AIRAID's oiled track day filter. Now, the media that's in this filter is a little bit different than what's in our regular air filters. But because of this special media and the open air box design, we're recommending that this kit only be used in dry, controlled track conditions. Well, that pretty well sums up the intake. Let's see how it installs. First, disconnect the negative battery cable. Unplug the IAT sensor. Loosen the intake tube, unclip the upper half of the factory intake box, and remove it along with the filter. Remove the bolt securing the lower half of the factory intake box, and remove the air box. Loosen and remove the two breathers on the factory intake tube, followed by the clamp at the turbo. Lastly, remove the stock intake tube. You remember I wanted to show you something about the factory intake tube. As you can see here, it gradually necks down to this tiny little opening that matches the factory turbo inlet. Well, compare that to the AIRAID intake tube. As you can see here, the diameter here is much, much larger, and we use this coupler to neck down to the factory turbo inlet width. Well, the cool part about this design is, should down the road you decide to upgrade the turbo that's got a larger diameter, all you need is a different coupler, and the AIRAID intake tube will more than support the larger turbo. Well, we certainly don't need this anymore, so let's get the rest of the system installed. Position the cold air dam panels where the factory intake box used to be. Secure one end to the upper radiator shroud. When it's positioned correctly, the cold air dam panel is sandwiched between the shroud and the radiator. Secure the other end using the bolt that came from the original intake box. Transfer the IAT from the upper half of the factory intake box, remove the original rubber O-ring, and replace it with the one supplied in the kit. Install the IAT in the AIRAID intake tube and secure it using the supplied hardware. Install the intake tube on the car by connecting it to the turbo first, followed by the cold air dam panels. Once everything lines up, tighten down the supplied hose clamps and reconnect the two breathers. Reconnect the IAT, and last but certainly not least, install the AIRAID track day filter. All right, well, that pretty well does it. And the last thing you're going to want to do is check your work. Double check that all your clamps and fasteners and everything else you touch during installation is nice and snug. Well, with the intake installed, you can see this is truly an open element design. There's absolutely no restriction of air to the air filter, and this larger diameter intake tube is more than capable of feeding both the factory turbo as well as a larger aftermarket version. Well, let's see how this thing sounds. Well, it's pretty obvious that this intake gives the engine a very aggressive sound. And this is a good time to reiterate that this race intake is for dry track conditions only. It is not designed to be used on the street. Well, thanks for checking out all the details on our new race intake for the 2.3-liter EcoBoost. We'll see you next time.